Good evening, everyone. My name is Vincent Rogers, and I am the Director of Housing for Frederick County. I'd like to welcome everyone here and those watching virtually to our Affordable Housing Information Session. As many of you may know from reading about tonight's event, our last Affordable Housing Needs Assessment was conducted in 2016. So recognizing that we need more current data about the affordable housing needs in Frederick County, we have partnered with an organization called TPMA to update Frederick County's housing needs assessment and to develop a strategic plan for affordable housing. I want to stress that tonight is the first in a series of community engagement opportunities around this project. The point of tonight's meeting is to introduce the plan to the community and to identify data and other measures that demonstrate the connection between housing affordability and our economic vitality and community well-being. There will be some opportunities tonight for engagement during the presentation, and we'll have time for questions at the end. We have microphones here for questions. And at this point, I'm very pleased to introduce our County Executive, Jessica Fitzwater, for our opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Vin. And just so you all know, Vin is really a rock star in housing, and we're so grateful to have him and really grateful to our whole housing team. Susan Brown, who's part of our housing department, is here as well. It's a really a top priority for my administration and for our community to make sure that we have stable, attainable, and housing that people really need and want in our community. And so we're really excited for the opportunity to update our housing needs assessment and to develop a strategic plan for how we are going to continue to move forward as a community and making sure that Frederick County government is playing our part as part of the solutions that we need to move forward. So shortly after I was elected, I brought together over 130 members of the community as a transition team that would help us really hit the ground running and also set the course for what the community expected out of this administration. And there are a few members of the transition team here, so thank you for those of you who are here. But one of the work groups with the team was our Housing and Quality of Life Committee. And one of their recommendations was to focus on this issue, but to look at our past report and to make sure that we are updating this assessment that, again, from 2016 is truly outdated. I'm excited that we've also been able to elevate our housing department into a full division, staff it up, and really make housing a true priority for county government. Our partnership with TPMA is really important here to have that third party perspective to help us gather data and to make sure that we are really developing a roadmap for how we're going to move forward to not only look at point in time right now at what the housing needs are, but look at what it's going to look like 10 years from now and help us to build that roadmap to eliminate that housing gap over those 10 years. I think it's also important to think about this in terms of the housing crisis that's facing not just Frederick County, but really the entire state of Maryland. And here's what we know. So Frederick County is considered part of the Metropolitan Washington area, and we are members of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. And in 2019, COG said that our region needed to build at least 320,000 housing units of all kinds in the next decade to accommodate regional growth. And last year, Governor Wes Moore said that the state of Maryland faces a housing shortage of nearly 100,000 units. For policymakers, this is a large-scale challenge, but for our residents, it's a much more personal challenge because, as you know, longtime residents are concerned about staying in their homes, and newer families are worried about how they will ever be able to buy a home in our community. Last year, we strongly supported Governor Moore's housing legislation, which is designed to make housing more affordable, and we know that there are more housing bills before the General Assembly right now that are priorities of Governor Moore's. And so we're excited that we're doing this work at a time where we also have an administration at the state level that is making housing a priority. But we do know from the data from regional leaders about all of these needs, and we know our local data must be updated. So we're very excited about this process. But it's not enough to just know what the need is now. We have to do that forward thinking, and we also need a plan. Frederick County residents need and deserve this strategic plan that's honest about the challenges that we face, but also honest about what local government can and cannot do, and honest about where we will need partners to work with us on this significant challenge for our community. And we know that the cost of housing is the primary driver of unaffordability and financial insecurity in Frederick County. It's really simple economics. When families are paying more than what they can afford for housing, and we'll talk about, I know that I'm not going to steal the thunder over here, but we're going to talk about what being cost burden means. And it's that 30% of your income, no more than that should be going towards housing. And I can tell you that many, many families in Frederick County are spending more than that on their housing. So when families are forced to do that, they're making other very difficult decisions for themselves, their children, and their families. They might be forced to skip their needed medications, or work multiple jobs, or spend less time with their families, live in unsafe conditions, or struggle with food insecurity. So we know that having more stable, affordable housing available at all levels of housing in Frederick County will lead to more access to job opportunities that contribute to our local economy, more stability for our children and better educational outcomes, and healthier and more self-sufficient families. I've made affordable housing a cornerstone of my administration from day one, and we know that there is no time to wait, and we're excited for the opportunities that are ahead of us. You know, Frederick County is fortunate to have a growing population and a growing economy, where there are other parts of the state that are not experiencing that. But now is the time to take on this challenge before it's too late. So you are you're in for a great presentation from our partners tonight. This, as Vin said, is just the first of a lot of community engagement that we're going to be doing, really to set the stage for what this study should do and to start to gather some input from the community. But there will be many other opportunities for us to gather those qualitative stories from you all, and to see what your experiences are in our community as we continue through this. So please stay engaged throughout this process. Share your experience tonight with your friends and neighbors, and help us to get the word out as we continue along this process. I also do want to acknowledge our partnership with the City of Frederick in this work, and I know we have some folks from the City of Frederick here today. We really appreciate their partnership as we tackle this together, and as I hope you all know, the city and the county work hand in hand on so many issues, and housing is just one of them. So I hope you'll please keep an eye on our website for more information after tonight, and stay engaged. And thank you so much for being here for the presentation, and we're looking forward to hearing your input. And I'm going to step away so I can listen to the presentation and listen to you all. So I'll turn it over to TPMA. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Certainly a tough act to follow. Found that out yesterday, and hopefully this is one of the last times I have to do that. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. My name is Ben Helkowski. I am a consultant with TPMA. I'm here with our Director of Housing and Community Development, Erin Finley. And we are here tonight to talk to you a little bit about affordable housing, what it means, how it might be impacting your community, and hopefully have a little bit of fun and enjoyment in the process. We have some surveys, some public input that we're looking for tonight, so hopefully you all have a chance to engage through that. So our presentation overview for tonight, we're going to give you a brief overview of the project and where this project kind of stems from, why is affordable housing important, and some of the impacts that it can have on your community. What exactly is affordable housing? What does that look like? What does that not look like? Who needs affordable housing? Who are the folks within your community? What do they look like? What do their lives look like? Things of that nature. Some myths and misconceptions that we often hear about affordable housing. And then we're hopefully going to work towards building a vision for the future. Certainly this isn't the last time we're going to have this conversation about what the future might look like, but as Vincent mentioned earlier, this is just the beginning. So the project purpose and context. So in 2016 was the last time, to our knowledge, that there was an affordable housing project completed for Frederick County. So our goal, it's 2025. This plan will be done hopefully by the end of the year. So 10 years after the Affordable Housing Needs Assessment, you all have this plan in hand to carry forward actionable strategies to help your community. So the plan objectives are to 1, identify the housing gap, 2, estimate the annual gap over the course of 10 years, and 3, create a strategic plan to address the gap. That's one of the things our organization really works towards, is making sure that these aren't plans that sit on a shelf, but that folks and individuals across the community can actually use and put towards something and work towards. So with that being said, I think we'll get started with why affordable housing is important.
All right, thanks, Ben. Appreciate it. And thanks, everybody, for joining us today. And thanks to County Executive Fitzwater. And thank you to you, Vin, for all of your assistance in this process. So, as Ben mentioned, I think really one of the ways we want to start off this conversation is exactly with this question: why is affordable housing important? It's a question we kind of get asked a lot, and we also get asked in kind of subtle ways. But I think something that it's very important to kind of really address head on, this really kind of critical question: why it impacts everybody, who it impacts. So, if you don't mind moving one forward. Thanks, Ben. So why is affordable housing important? Well, affordable housing and housing stability improves child success. Stable housing boosts child well-being and supports educational achievement. Frequent moves, evictions, homelessness can kind of intuitively, I guess, harm academic achievement, lower school attendance and performance, and decrease school readiness. Substandard housing conditions like leaks, mold, lead can impact cognitive development and physical health, leading to illness that disrupts school attendance. And a lack of affordable housing can also increase food insecurity. And research actually shows that for every $500 that average annual rents increase in a region, there's a 10% increase in food insecurity as well that affects low-income families. So absolutely critical for now and for our future and next generations. Affordable housing also supports seniors, allowing seniors to age in place. A majority of adults age 50 plus want to stay in their community. Not surprising. A lot of us have developed deep roots in these communities, and just because we've been here a long time, that doesn't mean, that as housing prices go up, that we feel like we should be forced out of the communities that we have called home. So it's really important for seniors to have the opportunity to age in place, if you will. But for seniors who are living on fixed incomes, affordable housing allows seniors to do that, to age in place through low-income housing, property tax relief, home modification grants, and things of that nature. And I know we've had some conversations just today about some of the programs to help seniors stay in their homes and age in place in the community as well. This is a really critical one. Affordable housing boosts local economies. Sometimes you hear some feedback, and we're going to talk, as Ben said, about myths and misconceptions a little bit later. But it's really critical to understand that actually affordable housing helps economies. It's not a drain on economies, as maybe some people might think. Housing availability and cost impact where employers locate their businesses, their ability to attract and retain employees as well. Employers often have a hard time filling jobs when workers can't afford to live nearby or live in the same community. And if workers live in the community where they're employed, they're more likely to reinvest their wages in that local community. It's absolutely critical. There's a lot of things that we think about when we think of impact on communities. But one of the other things that we've realized is that where there are communities with large, single-family kind of luxury homes, those communities that have the highest percentage of those among the housing mix are the most susceptible to economic downturns as well. We learned a lot during the 2008, 2009 kind of housing crisis about foreclosure rates and the communities that were affected most by those foreclosures. And they tended to be those communities with the highest percentage of like single family large homes as well. Also, and finally, affordable housing helps to sustain community ties, provides adult children the ability to live and work in the communities they grow up in. I know I've also had some conversations with county residents who have generations of family that have been in Frederick County. We want to make sure those families can stay here for generations to come, that have really helped build these communities. We'd hate to see a situation where people feel forced out of the place that they've called home and their family has called home for so long because there's a difficulty in affording a place to live. So one of the things that we also think about is to kind of paint this picture a little bit more directly is what I like to call the housing life cycle. It's kind of a pathway, I guess, if you will, about the kinds of uses that you kind of see as that housing can provide and address certain needs for different kind of members of our communities. So at the beginning, you see students and single living. I think many of us remember maybe our first apartments or something like this. Nice to have those opportunities to be able to find those living situations that we could afford when we're kind of just getting on our feet, maybe just getting out of college or leaving high school or something like that. We're getting our first jobs. A lot of those households are kind of younger adults, sometimes without children, and maybe have some roommates, right? I think we can all maybe remember a situation like that in our lives. And then as we move up, we think about those getting established households. Maybe those are first-time home buyers or move-up renters, you might want to think about, starting to enter that housing market. As we kind of see moving along this life cycle, you start to see when families start to grow, right? Maybe we're starting to fill those starter homes, those first-time homes with families and children. And as those families start to grow, those households start to look for a little more space, kind of become that settled household. Maybe move up one more time, get a little more space. And then those are the kinds of houses where we start to see maybe some of the children are growing up and moving on. And then on kind of the other side of things, maybe we had big families that filled homes, and as children move on, maybe those families, the head of the family starts to retire, start to think about downsizing potentially. And then finally, this kind of aging in place, aging comfortably, older residents who might need a situation with more minimal maintenance than like the large single family home, maybe where they raise children. So we kind of map out this pathway, this kind of cycle, to understand that there's a wide variety of needs that housing needs to meet for members of the community. It's very common these days to have communities that have a lot of houses that fit that kind of stages 3 and 4, right? Those nice single family homes, that's great. But we also want to make sure that there is housing, maybe smaller housing for first-time home buyers, maybe low maintenance, single story types of housing for downsizing seniors. And we want to make sure there is housing that meets all of those needs so we can have a robust community, growing up together and forming those ties. This is a really critical thing. When we start to realize that actually there are some types of housing that kind of fills those needs at both ends of that spectrum, if you will, that first-time home buyer, maybe that downsizing option as well. And we just think about what you might call kind of missing middle or smaller size housing. We need to see where those gaps are in Frederick County and work to address them.
Aaron, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge and welcome Councilmember MC Keegan-Air. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you for joining us.
And before we move on from this slide, there's one thing I want to address because it did kind of come up last night at previous presentations we've had. Increasing the stock of housing is an important part of creating more affordable housing. And I think the point that this slide really drives home is, yes, stock is important, but we also want to create a diverse type of housing stock. So we want those smaller homes for people. We want those mid-sized and larger homes for other families that are growing. But increasing housing stock alone is only a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, that's 100% right. It's about kind of creating a wider variety in that mix. So now we've talked a little bit about why housing, affordable housing, and a diverse mix of housing is important. I want to think about what is affordable housing and what is housing affordability. So they're kind of two concepts. Sometimes they are considered to be the same, and sometimes we can start to draw a distinction between affordable housing, housing affordability. We want to dive into that conversation here just a little bit. So I'm going to start off with some definitions for you. As the county executive already mentioned, cost burden did steal a little bit of my thunder, but that's okay. I think I can manage here. The definition of a cost burden household is that household that spends more than 30% of their household income on housing costs. Now, this is a really kind of critical thing to understand. When we talk about housing costs, it doesn't just mean mortgage or rent that's being charged, right? Utilities, maybe insurance, HOA fees, right? There's a lot of things that also kind of go into what we understand to be our housing costs. So even when we just think about what that mortgage is, right? Taxes as well, that doesn't paint a complete picture. So we want to have a little bit of a broader understanding about what housing costs are. So now that we've kind of established that, we could talk a little bit about affordable housing. So housing that is affordable by this definition, which is a housing that is not creating a cost burden situation on the household. So housing that is affordable is different for each household. It is a housing that doesn't require the household to spend more than 30% of their income on those costs. When you do see those families that do spend more than 30% of their income on housing costs, that's when we start to see, as county executive mentioned, an inability or difficulty to try to afford other important aspects of life in the budget. So think about, again, food, transportation, clothing, other kinds of things that might be put at risk by having expensive housing costs. A lot of kind of subsidies and a lot of conversations around affordable housing have to relate to this notion of the area median income. So the area median income is the midpoint of an area's income distribution. It's calculated annually by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and it refers to that median family income and then adjusts that based on the size of the household as well. So that's how that is defined, and you'll hear that term AMI kind of thrown around throughout this conversation and just in general in conversations about affordable housing as well. So low-income housing then, according to some of those same definitions, to build on some of the work we've already talked about here, is housing that is targeted for households earning up to 80% of the area median income. Sometimes you'll see that number be a little bit lower, but typically across the board, generally you're looking at housing that is affordable for households earning in that 80% range of AMI, which is the threshold in many cases for things like HUD's rental housing voucher program or low income housing tax credits are going to use those percentages of AMI. Sometimes, again, you'll see them in the 50, 60, and up to 80 range. Market rate housing, on the other hand, is housing that is not subsidized or sold at a reduced price. So the real estate market really kind of drives what the market rate housing costs are. And so kind of as a combination of those two concepts, or some of the concepts we're talking about, you also have what is often referred to as naturally occurring affordable housing, which is housing that in many cases does not have any subsidy attached to it and is at its market rate, but because it's maybe a little older or the condition of it is in that affordable range for a lot of families, low and moderate income families. Part of the real challenge that we start to realize is that there are fewer and fewer opportunities to see that naturally occurring affordable housing in our communities. And we'll take a closer look at that here in just a moment. But before we get moving too much forward, this is the fun part that Ben was talking about. That's what everybody thinks about when they think about housing conversations. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I do want to pause here for 1 second, though. So these are some definitions that exist within the affordable housing conversation ecosystem, if you will. This is not a comprehensive list to any stretch of the imagination. These are just some of the terms that we might be referring to later on throughout this presentation. So keep that in mind, that this list is lengthy and goes on, and this is just a snippet. But now we can get to the fun part.
So what we have here, a big QR code on the screen. There's also a web address if the QR code isn't working as well for you. And what we'd like for you to do is access the QR code. We have a little bit of, I guess it's a pop quiz, kind of. It's pop quiz because nobody knew they were going to be quizzed today. But we do have a couple questions just to try to gauge a level of understanding about what people think, how some of these terms relate to Frederick County.
And if you are tuning in through the live stream, you can access this survey. I will note we only have a limit of 15 or 50 participants, but I think we will accommodate that any event. You can visit menti.com and type in the code 72466000 and access the survey or pop quiz, if you will.
If the QR code's not working, yeah. So the first question is, So the first question is, we want to know what you think the median household income in Frederick County is. The median household income, we already talked a little bit about it. And now in this case, we're not talking about the DC metro area, which is oftentimes how some programs and services relate to being utilized in this county. We're actually talking about the county specifically itself and not the whole DC metro area. So if you can fill in on the Mentimeter there, what you think the median household income in Frederick County is. The next question we'll ask is similarly, what do you think the median sale price for a home in Frederick County is? Right, we have to do the first question first, and then we will ask at the next end what the median charged rent in the county is.
Yep. I do have to pull this down and switch over to this presentation.
So again, the first question then.
After I validate my Wi-Fi connection.
There you go.
Oh, PG.
We practiced this, I swear. We did. We had it ready to go.
If there's not one obstacle, there's another one.
Yes. Okay.
For you.
There we go. We're starting to see answers come in here. So, what is the median household income in Frederick County? So we have a leader at $103,237. The median household income, actually, so this is a 2023 number, was $114,360. That is the median household income overall. There we go. Okay, now we're working. We're up and running now. Okay, next question. What is the median sale price of a home in Frederick County? And those are, in the thousands. So at the end there, what is that? $750,000 then?
Yeah, so the $750 is not $750. That would be $750,000.
Okay. We're starting to see some numbers come in here. And the answer is the median sale price of a home in 2023, $499,990. So $500,000, that's the median sale price of a home in Frederick County. And quite frankly, that was in 2023, at the end of 2023. It's very reasonable to think that might have increased in the time since then. Finally, our last little pop quiz question today. What is the median charged rent in Frederick County? I feel like I'm doing like a game show up here.
Prices are right.
Yeah. Closest without going over.
Are you able to read off some of the responses?
So we have, of the choices there, we had the majority has selected $1,700 a month, which is the correct answer. So $1,700 a month, $1,777 a month is the median monthly charged rent in the county. So one of the things that's kind of critical to understand here as we look at these numbers, and I think it should come back up on the screen here any moment. Yes, fantastic, is how much these numbers have increased over a 5-year period. So while we look at the chart in front of you, I think one of the things that we're combating as we think about kind of public sentiment and awareness of affordable housing needs, is how much kind of ideas that are out there are based on, understandably, a lifetime of experience with dealing with those terms and thinking about affordable housing. But so much has changed in just the last 5 years. And so I want to lean into this just a little bit. So if you see on the chart there, the darker blue line is the county number, which the median sale price from December 2018 to 2023 has gone up essentially 60% in a 5-year period, 59%. The number for the city of Frederick, over 71% increase in the median sale price of a home in a 5-year period. When we think about rental costs, also have increased dramatically, both in the county and the city have risen by a third, 33% increase over that 5-year period. They've risen at, probably not surprisingly, roughly the same rate. A lot of the rental opportunities, of course, are in the city. So those are very similar trajectory you see there. So one of the really kind of critical things in looking at those, we look again, in the county, the median sale price raised about 60% in 5 years. The effective rent raised by a third, 33% in 5 years. But the median household income only raised 19% in that time. It's a significant impact on our ability to afford housing in Frederick County. This is putting pressure on our current residents. It's making it difficult for, again, the next generation to become established in this community as well. And we also wanted to kind of further split out what those income increases look like between the owner-occupied households and the renter-occupied households. So even though the number is relatively the same, owner-occupied household income has raised 21% over that amount of time to where it is right now at almost $136,000 at the end of 2023. Renter-occupied income has also increased by roughly a quarter, but the median income for a renter-occupied household is $64,619 at the end of 2023, making it very difficult to afford that median rent, right, of $1,777. And so that really kind of leads us to our kind of next question, which is a bit of a shifting concept. Who needs affordable housing? And I do think that there has been a lot of shift over that just in the last 5 years and 10 years that really start to change a little bit of maybe some of our understanding about who is kind of occupying these units.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So you've seen this definition a couple times tonight, and you're going to see it again and hopefully more and more. But housing is considered affordable if housing costs are considered less than 30% of your household income. Anything above that, you're considered to be cost burdened. If we look at percent of households that are cost burdened in Frederick County by household income, you'll see that a huge majority of folks, a lot of folks, everyday people, are cost burdened. Folks, 93% of individuals making less than $20K a year are cost burdened. Those making between $20,000 to $34,999. 70% of those individuals are considered to be cost burdened. That number doesn't drop too much from the next two income brackets, so $35,000 to $4,000 or $49,999. 64% of those individuals are cost burdened, and 60% for those making $50,000 to essentially $75,000. So. I don't know about you, but I think looking at the statistic of folks from 50,000 to 75,000, that's I think what would be considered to be a good paying job. 60% of those folks are still considered to be cost burdened. So there's a big mismatch there. So in total, 26% of Frederick County households are considered to be cost burdened. 19% of those are owner occupied households, and 47% are renter occupied. This is a trend that we generally see wherever we're working and across the country, that renter-occupied households are the ones the ones who are cost burdened.
Well, before you move on, I want to pause here. Numbers, are helpful to kind of understand and paint this picture, but I want to pause just a second here. Across the entire county, 1 in 4 households is spending more on their housing costs than is considered to be affordable. 1 in 4. When we think about renter households, that's nearly half. Nearly half of all renter households are in a position where they're going to potentially struggle to afford a lot of critical needs that we mentioned earlier. And that's that 30% threshold. There's another step that we refer to as severe housing cost burden, which is a 50% threshold. And even in this case, we have almost a quarter of all renter households spending more than half of their incomes just on housing costs, more than half. Now, I have a young child. I don't know how many of you out there do too. Daycare is expensive. So I can't even imagine a position where I have food and clothing and transportation and the needs of daycare, child and daycare, and spending over half of my household income on housing and trying to make all of those things work. One of the things that really tries to help flesh that out just a little bit is trying to look at what are those other costs, right? What are those other things that make up that kind of survival budget, if you will? And
so we couldn't talk about a lot of this stuff without giving attention to the program United for Alice. So for those who do not know, United for Alice is a program that came from a lot of United Ways across the country. I think there are 20-something participating states. Hopefully that's growing every year. And fortunately, Maryland is one of those states that is gathering this information. So ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed Individuals. So these aren't people without jobs. These are people who are working a lot of the jobs that you see every day when you go to the corner store, go get groceries, go get coffee, or sitting down for food at a restaurant, things of that nature. So these are a lot of the folks that fall under this category. And ALICE, what they really do is they look at the incomes of these individuals and the costs that they face on a day-to-day basis. So childcare, food, transportation, things of that nature. And they set a minimum livability scale, if you will. So how much do they need to be making in order to afford their everyday costs? So here's an example survival budget for a single adult and a household with 2 adults and 2 children. I'm not going to walk through this list. I implore you to look through this yourself, but rent numbers, those are kind of some of the numbers that we went over already. But if you look down at the monthly totals, between what they're making and their wage, there's quite a big gap there. So it's pretty staggering. Good.
Yeah, one of the great things that United Way does with these kind of ALICE households is really try to put a little bit more of an understanding on the gap between this kind of federal poverty level, which you see on the screen in front of you, for a single person that's effectively $15,000 a year. A family of 4, it's a little over $31,000 a year. But just the federal poverty level doesn't really establish an understanding of the families that are really struggling, because as we can kind of compare those numbers to the household survival budget that is kind of behind there, there's a large gap between a family of 4, that federal poverty level is $31,000, and the $95,400 that is required to kind of make ends meet in our communities. So one of the huge things is we're starting to see, as housing costs rise and the cost of living continues to rise, a big gap that's starting to form between what we might have previously understood as families who are kind of in need of affordable housing, potentially in the kind of decades decades ago. And what we're looking at now, which is that a much, much greater percentage of our working families and households and members of our community are struggling to make ends meet financially, well above that kind of established what we might think of as poverty level wages there.
So I mentioned a few of the occupations earlier in the presentation, but here is a list that we pulled using labor market information. So if you look at that second column, 2024 jobs, these are the jobs that are organized that are the most abundant jobs that you will see across Frederick County. So general operations managers, retail salespersons, cashiers, so on and so forth. These are the most listed occupations that you have. If you'll notice, general operations managers is the only occupation on this list that exists without that, that is outside of that ALICE threshold or above the federal poverty line. So if you look to the column on the far right, that is their housing affordability threshold. So essentially 30% of their income, of their median annual earnings divided by 12. These are the costs that they could put towards housing. If you look at the list, all of those housing affordability thresholds are below the median rent in the county.
Yeah, these, again, are the 10 most common jobs in the county. 9 of them earn an annual wage effectively of less than $45,000 a year. So these are individual wages. So when we compare those to household incomes, it's not exactly a one-to-one, although there's certainly many households that have just a single income earner. But even in the case where we have 2 income earners in these most common occupations in the county, there are very few that even with 2 of these incomes where we're even coming close to that kind of affordability range, especially when children are involved as well. I'll just remind you that in Frederick County, for a family of 4, we talked about the overall AMI, but if we're looking at a family of 4 here, for example, the AMI for a 4-person household is $154,000. So any 2 really of all these most common jobs, there's a big gap between that kind of median income and what most, a vast majority of those top earning occupations are bringing home at the end of the day. And a huge gap, again, if you look at that housing threshold, that affordability threshold in the far right corner, not a lot of easy ways to make it to that median rent of $1,700 a month. And that's, again, just charged rent, not including utilities, not including insurance and other things that might be part of household costs, of housing costs.
So we're going to look at a few situations. I will disclaim that these are not specific individuals who we've interviewed or gathered information from, but we did look at the labor market information and created these scenarios of folks that likely do exist across the community. What we try to do is look at what percentage of households can they afford in the community. So if you look at a Frederick County public school teacher, step 10, so 10 years of teaching, roughly in their younger 30s, with 1 child in childcare, their household income is likely around $65,000 and their affordability threshold is right around $1,600. They can afford 4% of 2+ bedroom rentals within their price range. We looked specifically at 2 or more bedrooms because they have that child and you likely want that child to have their own room. In addition to that, they can afford 4% of all homes across the county. So in this scenario, we have a couple, a cashier and a customer service representative with a household income of roughly $69,000, an affordability threshold of $1,700. They're about 22% rentals in their price range and about 5% of for sale homes within their price range.
So this household, these are 2 income earning households without children. So without all of the costs associated with childcare, feeding children, clothing children, all of those costs. And in this case, we can look at 1-bedroom rentals, which is why you see that number a little bit higher. Nonetheless, two-income household, no children, only about 1 in 5 rentals in the entire county would be affordable for this family. And even though these are cashier, customer service representatives, these are both on the list of most common jobs throughout the county as well. So it's a very kind of likely scenario. And again, that household affordability threshold below the median charged rent that we found in our previous slides.
Mm-hmm. And here's another couple that we have. So the Frederick County Deputy Sheriff, their salary is right around $70,000. That individual with a stay-at-home parent and having 2 children, there's 12% of 2 or more bedrooms rentals within their price range, and 1% of 3-bedroom rentals. So likely those children would have to be sharing a room if they are in a rental situation. And 6% of all homes are within their sale range. One note that is different from 2 slides ago, I think we were applying the tax credit for children. That's how their percentage of availability goes up a little bit. Regardless, that doesn't stretch a very long way, and the housing stock for them is still very limited. And the last one is probably the most staggering, at least from my perspective. A senior resident on Social Security and retirement benefits with a household income of $23,000, there are 0 rentals in their price range and only 1 home for sale within their price range. We did do a tour of LIHTC properties yesterday. We got to see them across the community, and I think it just highlights the importance of using both government programs and free market programs to create more housing in a community, because the free market probably isn't going to serve individuals like this.
Very, very difficult for the free market to find a solution for, in this case, a senior existing on Social Security benefits alone, which places them actually below the 30% of AMI threshold, just Social Security alone. So even those, Ben mentioned those LIHTC properties, for those who don't know, those are the low income housing tax credit program. So with those LIHTC properties, there are existing units in the county for 30% AMI and for age-restricted individuals, but Social Security alone doesn't even get us to that 30% threshold. So even those that have they're great subsidies to bring that cost all the way down to that 30% threshold, even that is not low enough necessarily to make it affordable for existing just on Social Security benefits.
All right, so we're going to finish up, I guess, the presenting at you all with some myths and misconceptions, and then we'll be looking for some input, and then we'll wrap up with questions. This is something we wanted to address earlier. Please hold all your questions until the end. We do have a microphone that we would like you to ask the questions into, so it does connect to the live feed. But at any rate, myth 1 is that affordable housing increases crime. There have been several studies on this that this is just simply not the case. If you think about it, individuals who are homed are less likely to engage in crime. They have some of their basic needs met, primarily housing and shelter, which creates more stability for their family and accessibility to all other basic needs that come through with that. One of the studies I'd like to point out on this slide is how do low-income families spend their money. There's a lot of research. Folks sometimes will hear them say, oh, they're just going to spend their money on drugs, alcohol, tobacco, so on and so forth. A lot of studies find that not to be true. They find that families, especially lower income families, more than anything will spend their money on basic needs and actually educational materials for their children. So again, it's a myth that's out there. It's been researched and found untrue time after time.
We encounter this thought out there all the time as we do work all around the country. A lot of opposition to creating affordable housing or putting affordable housing in neighborhoods. A lot of people say, oh, it'll bring crime. This is going to be very bad for the neighborhood. There's really no reason to believe that whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is kind of goes into where one of the things that we like to advocate for is mixed income properties, because it brings a lot of people together who were originally separated through section housing and things of that nature. But yeah. Myth 2, affordable housing looks cheap and decreases property values. So here are some images of LIHTC properties and affordable housing developments within Frederick County. Here's a Francis Scott Key building that I believe exists in the city of Frederick. It is also a mixed income property. So as I just mentioned, bringing families of different incomes together, increasing that community value of the living space. Next up, we have the Ox Fiber Apartments. We actually did see these yesterday. A newer development that was made possible through a LIHTC property, and the Sharp Square Apartments. And the last myth that we have is affordable housing does not contribute to the local tax base and overburdens infrastructure. So we've seen we hear this often that, and it's a worthy claim that increased development will put a lot of stress on infrastructure. What we've been seeing is that the revenue from the new developments typically and will often outpace the cost for specific regions. On top of that, it's bringing in more taxpayers and creating more housing stability for families. So families that are more stable can gain access to better jobs and higher incomes, which is stimulates the economy for the entire area. Aaron, I think you might have some information to add here.
Well, I think this is kind of really critical. Housing in general and affordable housing brings people to communities. It strengthens tax bases, but it also kind of creates opportunities for workers to live and be part of our community. I think there's some concern that we hear voiced from time to time. Well, if you subsidize this housing, you're just giving away this money to developers, and we're not getting it. The money doesn't stay local. Just don't find that to be true at all. I think there's a lot of reason to ensure that we have housing for people. It makes people live close by. They spend their money, as Ben mentioned, spending on their kind of household needs. A lot of this money gets put back into the local economy. And there's just no findings necessarily that suggest, there's kind of negative impact on the local economy by having housing people can afford. It might seem that just is kind of intuitive. It's good to have housing people can afford. That's good for economies. That's good for communities. But we do hear quite a bit of this pushback, as we said. So wanted to take some time to kind of address some of these head on.
Mm-hmm. And there's another one that is kind of associated with this, but also I think it's the other myth, decreasing property values. So there's also been more research on this as of late because this is a common argument and people are finding it less and less to be true. Again, a lot of the finding is that more affordable housing developments in the area have a net zero impact on property values. There's been some research in Alexandria, Virginia, and Orange County, California. I'm kind of afraid to mention those names because they are kind of anomalies, but they might be anomalies. But at any rate, they found a 0.16% increase in property value. So all that to say, I think there's more research to be done in this space, but a lot of it is proving the fact that affordable housing does not decrease property values.
So I think as we kind of look to kind of wrap up some of this conversation here, helpful to kind of think about how some of those myths, can be kind of combated, right? We want to think about ways to look past some of the opposition that we get. But also what we want to do is start to understand a shared vision for our community. It's only once we kind of work together to achieve a shared vision, to work towards something like consensus, try to understand what we are all looking to get, what we're looking to see in our community as we move forward, in this case, as it relates to housing. We want to start to talk about the vision for the future. Before we start to ask some of those questions of you, though, always helpful to kind of do a quick overview about what governments can do and what governments can't do to kind of directly address some of these issues. So what local governments can do, kind of importantly, can advocate at the local, the county, the state, the federal levels to identify areas where we can work together or try to influence legislation to allow local residents to meet needs local communities to meet their needs for affordable housing. You know, Maryland is a Dillon's law, Dillon's rule state. We don't need to get into all of that right now, although if you want to talk to me afterwards, I've got lots of thoughts. But what that means is effectively that the state house has quite a bit of influence over what local jurisdictions can do at the local level, at the policy level, to address some of these challenges. Maryland is in a better situation with its Dillon's law than some of the other states we work in that I won't mention by name, that can be very restrictive. But nonetheless, I think advocacy at the state level is a really important thing that local governments can do, especially in a Dillon's rule state. Secondly, the local government can commit resources to housing programs and services. We've spent a lot of time today meeting with county staff, talking about programs and services, trying to identify where there are successes, where they can be scaled. Partner with or incentivize the private sector to create opportunities for affordable housing development. This is really critical. For a vast majority of the development that takes place, we're looking to the private sector to create it. They're the ones who are doing the building. Those are where the developers are. There are some instances of public housing, so it's not all of the development that is purely through the private sector, but a vast, vast majority of it is. So those opportunities to find partnership opportunities, to network with local developers, to network with members and industries in the private sector, to find ways where we can work on some of these problems together, see where those barriers are that we can help overcome as local governments. Also seek out funding sources, whether private or public funding sources, to make economic stability kind of a priority, make home ownership achievable. This is a really critical thing as well. Again, we work with communities all over the country. Some of them are very proactive in seeking out funding opportunities. Some are not. But that is where local government can do that. And then finally, kind of adjust zoning, right? Think about policy, local policy, to facilitate the types of development that we need to fill in those gaps. But also, we also want to look at what government cannot do, because quite frankly, there's some misconceptions out there a little bit about what we can expect our government to do. The government cannot regulate population growth. They can't change demand for people wanting to move into an area. There's very little control, right, over any of that. The best thing we can do is empower our local governments to respond, to anticipate, be proactive, and kind of respond to that demand, to that potential growth, make sure that, it can be done in a way that benefits the existing community and people who'd like to move to the community. Set insurance rates. Local governments have very little, if zero, control whatsoever about insurance rates or interest rates, for that matter. The local government cannot control your assessed home value in the same way it can't control demand. Home value is in many ways tied to those growths in demand. There's not a lot of control over the local government can do to kind of change unassessed home value. And finally, determine the wages paid by local businesses. Very little opportunity for the government to step in. Obviously, there has been some effort. Maryland has recently raised, I believe, its state minimum wage. So there are those opportunities occasionally to do something like minimum wage adjustment. Again, that was at the state level, not something that we really are seeing a lot done at the local level. But also, there's just very little control. We do want to see wages increase at the pace to keep up with housing costs. Not a lot the local government can necessarily do to make that happen. So with that, we want to think about that vision for the future, understanding what we maybe can expect or hope our government to do and what we can hope and expect, cannot hope and expect them to accomplish as far as these things. So we do have some questions that we want to ask and get your input on.
Yeah, you should be able to pull up your old Mentimeter if you scan the QR code earlier. If not, it's up there again for your accessibility. If you are tuning in through the live stream, again, I think you might be able to scan the QR code through the screen. If not, you can go to menti.com and use that code there, 7246-6000.
Thank you, Ben.
I feel like a radio host.
I know. It's very exciting. So we do want to get some responses from you, and we're going to go after we talk about some of these questions and find out where you can continue to provide input on our project and our process here, but really kind of helpful to start thinking about some of this shared vision and the vision for the community moving forward. So some of the questions that you'll see there, one, what should be the county's top priorities for housing over the next 10 years? I know it's kind of a vague question, but it's kind of intentionally vague. We kind of want to see what kind of responses we're going to get back here. So what should the top priorities for housing be for the county over the next 10 years? I'm going to keep asking some of these questions, and you can take some time to fill this out now. You're also welcome to complete some of this survey later on. We'll still get your responses, so don't feel like you need to hurry up and type everything in before we finish today. The next question is, well, we're already starting to see some answers come in, and you can see some of this kind of word cloud of some of the responses we're already receiving here.
Yeah, we see density, LIHTC, senior housing, workforce housing. Yep. Okay.
We're going to go ahead and move on just in the interest of time. We also do have on the project website that we'll be sharing an opportunity for you to share some of these answers with us, because I'm told that as soon as we click to the next question, maybe you won't be able to answer this one anymore. So we do want to have that. We still want to collect this information from you and hear from you about this. So there are opportunities to go to the county website where we can post these questions and collect your feedback from you there as well.
Yeah. Before we do jump ahead, I do see workforce housing emerging to the top as a top priority. I think we should maybe take some time to address what exactly that is. Maybe the definition of what that might look like.
Sure. I'd be happy to. So workforce housing is kind of a little bit of a nebulous term. Sometimes you'll see it defined as somewhere between 80% and 120% of that AMI. Sometimes you'll see it defined that way. Sometimes that change, some of those definitions can change by municipality or by area. HUD has sometimes directly defines workforce housing. Sometimes you'll see it defined in some programs and services. But the real tricky thing about this is, as we've already kind of established and we looked at some of those jobs and those top common occupations in the county, that 80 to 120 range that you see sometimes defined as workforce housing doesn't always exactly match what our workforce is actually earning. So sometimes when we see those limits placed on workforce housing or incentives that are put down for developers to develop quote unquote workforce housing that is in that 80 to 120% AMI range, it's not always directly meeting the needs of the workforce. And so that's a really critical thing. Now, it's quite possible that not everybody put workforce housing meant 80 to 120, but housing that is affordable for the workforce. And part of what our process is, part of what our goals are in this project is to help define what is affordable for Frederick County residents, right? Where that workforce housing really is on the ground, what it means for people to have housing that is affordable for the workforce. Okay, so the second question, what barriers have you or people you know faced in seeking affordable housing? Housing that is affordable. I want to hear some stories, put in some concepts here, either you or someone you know. As we mentioned, there are a lot of people in need of this quote-unquote affordable housing, right? Many of the top occupations, as we looked at the kind of percentages of people who earn a range that puts them into that area where there might be need for subsidized or even just housing that is affordable. What are some barriers that you or someone you know have faced in seeking affordable housing? Oh, great. Thank you. So we are seeing high cost, low inventory, not enough inventory, a lack of appropriate inventory. I think we're starting to see a trend here, which is finding that there is a gap in that type of housing that is affordable, regardless of where we kind of fit on that AMI spectrum, right? It's very difficult, especially as housing costs continue to go up, to really find that. There seems to be a lack of choices, a lack of inventory, no missing middle, some policy, some zoning, some people are already very well acquainted with some issues relating to affordable housing, I see. And loss of, in this case, the child tax credit or other support systems as well. This is really a critical one, and I want to address it. Don't know where to look for support or help in affording these. One of the things that certainly there are sources available through the housing division that offers a lot of resources where you can find out more information, but also part of what we're looking at is the reach, right? Are people knowing, are they aware of where to find resources, where to find this kind of information? That's also something we're going to be looking at, the kind of effectiveness of some of these programs as well. So very helpful to have that feedback here. Thank you. Okay.
Should we move on?
Yeah. Thank you again for your responses. We'll have more opportunities for you to continue to answer this on the project's website. And the final question, our kind of visioning set of questions here, what are you hoping our strategic plan will address? So a lot of kind of ways that the plan, like what we're working on, the data that we're working on, the needs assessment, and then that strategic plan, a lot of ways those can be utilized. What are you hoping is addressed in this plan in our research is our final question here today. I think it looks like the county executive had to leave, but we asked her the very same question early today. What are you looking to get out of this plan? What are the kind of main points that you are hoping that we can answer for you? Main questions. So I was seeing the number of units short, the existing gap. That's absolutely an important piece of what we're working on right now. Not just the existing gap, but also that projected gap over the next 10 years. Again, we don't need to get into all of the details of our housing demand model. It's late enough that I'm sure I'd put some of you to sleep having that conversation. But that's obviously something we look at. And I'll just say quickly while some of these answers in, we build housing demand models specific to each project that we work on. So we don't have a kind of boilerplate approach. It takes a little bit longer. It's a little bit harder, but we've seen enough examples of where a kind of very standard approach doesn't really match the very lived experience, the very real experience on the ground. And so we build a special projection and model for each of our projects, and we're already starting to work on it for Frederick County. Okay, good. So awareness of housing problems, absolutely something that we'll be looking at. Tangible ideas and strategies, that's very critical. So we have our two main phases of this project. One, as I mentioned, is this needs assessment. We're already crunching the numbers. We're already talking about that housing demand model. We're collecting some of this qualitative information, which also goes into this needs assessment, understanding where those gaps are. That's going to be the first phase. And then after we kind of have an understanding of what those findings are, what those needs, gaps, barriers are in the community housing right now, then we're going to really start to see about what are the strategies that we can put together to meet some of those head on and really address those. When we think about strategies, it is very much our responsibility to put together strategies that hopefully will work, that apply directly to the needs of this county and these communities within, and really trying to think about what's feasible, right? Whether that is kind of based on the available resources or whether that's kind of political will, but understanding that not every strategy is going to make sense for every community, and focus on achieving and realizing the ones that hopefully will make an impact here in Frederick County. With that in mind, actually, I want to turn to the next steps for our project. Do you mind pulling that up for me? Thank you.
That last question should still be live if anybody is still working on their answer.
Yeah, thanks. So this isn't the last you're going to see from us. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, you'll have to make that determination for yourself. But this is not the last you're going to see from us. We're going to be here a number of more times throughout our process, and there's going to be opportunities where we can continue, hopefully, to rely on you for your feedback to help guide us in our project here in our data collection. So we have, yeah, thank you. So here's a kind of overview of our project plan, if you will. The ones that are a little bit lighter shade there are the ones I want to draw your attention to. We're going to be back in the spring to do some more stakeholder engagement workshops. And also put out a community survey. This is where we can really, really use your help in distributing the survey. We want to distribute it far and wide and make sure we get the best response possible. We want to look to community organizations to help us with distribution efforts. We want to talk to faith-based organizations and employers and the school system. And we want these surveys in as many hands and as many homes as we can get them in because it's really critical. It's one thing for us to collect as much data as we can from our desktops, right? And that's useful information, but we need to make sure that it's matching the lived experience on the ground. And the only way we can do that is to collect information, to hear from you. So there's going to be a survey that we're putting together. I don't exactly have the specific questions yet, but we're going to be looking for information on, kind of thoughts about different approaches that might work. We also want to know about some barriers that might exist. And so we really want to have a good, solid response to this survey. And we'll have that in the field probably in the spring. We are going to have more community workshops as we kind of wrap up some of our discovery phase. We'll be back in the community having conversations about thinking about strategies together, right? What are the kinds of strategies we might seek out and work on together? And also, of course, going to be working with kind of a task force. Is that the name? Have we decided to name a housing task force to kind of help guide us through this project? And also meeting with stakeholders regularly through small group interviews, one-on-one interviews, stakeholder workshops to make sure that, again, we can all be working on this collectively. We'd love to seek out input from the different municipalities as well, have them involved in this process. What we have come to realize, and I think hopefully we've all come to realize maybe through some of the information presented today, is that these are hard problems and we face a really significant challenge when we think about housing, and not just one challenge, but many challenges. There is no panacea, right? There is no single solution that is going to help us meet our gap, and we can pat ourselves on the back and say, oh, we thought of that really well, one really good idea, and now we fixed everything, right? It's not out there. Believe me, we do this a lot. We read and we research and we see what other people are doing. It really takes everyone. It's going to take individuals and organizations from across different sectors, different communities, and really all hands on deck to try to make sure that we can seek out solutions that are impactful and really help us address really one of the most pressing challenges that exists today. And it's going to have very serious impact on our community if we can start to make progress there. And so we do want kind of everybody in. As I mentioned, there is a web page that is going to where you can track our progress throughout this report. This is a different QR code.
So yes? This is the same QR code from. Oh, wait, no, this is not the same as the Mentimeter. Yeah, we changed that from yesterday. So this will take you to our website where we are providing project updates. The slides for this presentation will also be available on this website. Give us a couple days. We want to make some changes and remove our comments and everything, but they'll be available soon. And it's the label for the website is publicinput.com/Frederick County Housing Plan 2025. Again, the QR code that is on the screen currently will take you there.
QR code did not scan. Well, okay. If you do continue to have issues, you can see our email addresses up on the screen as well. Feel free to take a picture and contact us, and we'll make sure we can connect you with this and other resources and answer any questions that you might have. With that, I think we'd like to open it up for any questions. There's a microphone right up here, and I think we have a few minutes left where we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions or comments?
Or comments.
Yep. Oh, gotcha.
There you go.
Good evening. Cap Kaplowitz, citizen activist. A few questions. I would disagree on the wages being paid by business being affected by government because there are minimum wage laws, even though the federal minimum is nowhere. And there are the Paid Family and Medical Leave Act, which we passed in Maryland. The FAMLI is being worked on now because I'm part of the group that's working on that. So there is government impact. So I disagree with that conclusion on that slide. As a senior citizen, everything has gone up because of inflation. And while the inflation rate has come down, what has not gone up is the limit income for which you qualify for different programs. It was set the same way the poverty limit is way out of whack with current situations. What I could qualify on my wife's and my combined income, thank God I have above that limit. But I know people that are right on the line and that limit has gone nowhere. And the local government and the state government have the ability to raise limits for state programs, not for federal programs. We need to look at what can we do to raise those limits so more people will qualify for the programs that will help. We have a program both in the city and the state, or in the county, I should say, where a developer gets to pay a fee in lieu of building the affordable housing. And while I know that the money they're paying in lieu of affordable housing gets used, it does not solve the problem of affordable housing. And I want you to look at that and make adjustments to that fee that they're paying. We know, and I really appreciate you saying that the money was not being spent on drugs, because the Republican narrative which Joe Manchin bought was that if you kept the child tax care credit, you were going to have people spending money on drugs. And that was the reason he gave for voting against the extension of the child tax care credit. That will not happen in the state, and definitely nothing's going to happen at the federal government that helps anyone but the oligarchs. We have a surplus of commercial properties. Frederick Mall was purchased on February 24th of 2017. Other than a restaurant over there by Boscov's and Warehouse Cinemas, that property sits there as an eyesore. It sits there doing nothing. Why is the city, why is the county not negotiating with Dr. Moe to see about converting some of that property to affordable housing or workforce housing? We have property, the commercial property in this county, some of which is no longer being leased. We had a wonderful temporary bioscience group that came in over there. It's not Corporate Drive, it might be Corporate Drive, but it's over there on the east side of the city. And they came in, I think it was a loom, and they built like 3 or 4 buildings, and then the company fell apart. And now those buildings sit there with nothing going on. What are you doing to work with the commercial sector, the Chamber of Commerce, to identify properties that are underused, that they have not been able to get any tenants for, and say to them, let's work together and convert that? What are you doing to make sure that the Chamber of Commerce and the commercial interest in this city find a way to use that property that sits there vacant all the time? Let's see, what else do I have? Last thing, before I retired, I had a long career in IT. And one of the things I specialized in during my IT career was doing best practices. In Y2K, I looked at 50 different welfare systems for food stamps and for aid to families. And I identified which states were doing the best jobs. And I wrote a best practices guide. Why are we not looking at the jurisdictions that have some of these problems and are solving them? I'll give you this because this is examples. For example, Portland has a dwelling initiative, helps people that are homeless actually have a place to go that's a solid structure. The city of Ulm, Germany, has pods that homeless people can occupy to get them out of the elements, that gives them something other than sleeping in a park bench or sleeping in a tent. Because we have people in this county, in the wealthiest country in the world, sleeping in tents in 1-degree weather. In Atlanta, they cleared a parking lot that was no longer used. They went out and they got shipping containers. They converted the shipping containers. They have a housing village now built from shipping containers. You can find 22 different plans for conversions of shipping containers. You can do it for less than it would cost you to clear the land to put a house up. We need to be forward thinking. We need to look at best practices. What in your study is looking at those best practices around jurisdictions in states and localities that will make a difference? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments and your questions. A lot to tackle there. I think a few things. It's absolutely our part of our project. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely part of our project to look at existing policy and programs and services. So you mentioned the MPDU, where there have been the option to have cash in lieu, payment in lieu of creating the affordable housing units as part of that policy. We want to look at that policy. We want to see what the we want to understand what the appropriate goal of that policy is. What's the best way to make sure that if the goal is to create more affordable units, how we can adjust potentially that ordinance to meet that goal. As you mentioned, revenues coming in from that payment in lieu are being utilized. So it's also possible that we don't want to have all of those dry up necessarily. Again, I want to stress that we're at the very early stages of this project. And so I don't have an answer for you on what the appropriate adjustments might be at this time, but that's certainly something we want to look at along with all programs and services and policy.
Yeah, so we will be looking at MPDU PIL. We will be looking at the possibility of converting from commercial to residential.
Yes.
And the reason we have this partnership is that so we can look at best practices from across the country. It's the very point of this project is how can we learn from other jurisdictions and take what works for Frederick County. Ken?
Hi, I'm Ken Oldham. I'm the CEO of United Way of Frederick County. I would typically stand here and talk about Alice, but you have already done that, so thank you very much. My question is this. Year after year, I go to the website that lists how the LIHTC credits have been awarded, and I'm always concerned that they appear to be going to other communities, and while we're getting some, there seems to be disproportionate numbers going elsewhere. So my question is, how do we become more competitive in the LIHTC competition?
Thank you for your question, and thank you for all the work you're doing with United Way. So I spend really an inordinate amount of time looking at what they call the qualified allocation plan that each state puts together, the QAP. Imagine maybe if you're familiar with the LIHTC process, maybe you're familiar with the QAP. They're sometimes complicated documents, and admittedly, the recent changes I think that are being proposed or have recently been passed to the Maryland QAP are things that I need to look into further. However, I think, as again, I'm sure you're aware by looking at those awards, 9% LIHTC, and forgive me, everybody, we're going to get in the weeds here just a little bit to answer this question. 9% LIHTCs are extremely, extremely competitive. They are, as we work around the country, we're seeing that even in some cases, those 9% allocations still aren't creating affordable housing projects that can pencil, right, that are financially feasible, and there's still even a gap. So while a lot of the low-income housing tax credits are helpful and really in many cases one of the most effective ways to create affordable housing and in some cases deeper affordability, they're very, very competitive. I do say that over the last I think 5 or 7 years or so, there have been a pretty good number of 9% projects awarded throughout the county. I was just looking at the list earlier today, as a matter of fact. I will also say that I have been very impressed with the number of 4% LIHTC credits that are being utilized throughout the county as well. In many cases, in many states, 4% LIHTCs are effectively limitless, because they're not as competitive and they can be a little bit easier to award. In many cases, that's because they're not effective, quite frankly. I guess that's my opinion. I should say that. They're less effective, certainly, than the 9%. I've been really impressed with the amount of 4% applications and awards that have been utilized throughout the county, in many cases because of the deferred loan program that the county offers with some of the money that's collected from the payment in lieu from the MPDU. So I don't know how to answer your question directly, except that we are going to look at the scoring metrics in the QAP, and we're going to find ways to maximize the county project's competitiveness for being awarded those projects. For 9% LIHTC, I'll just say this quickly, and then maybe we could move on, and I'm happy to continue to talk about this if you'd like. I maybe lost my train of thought, but they're extremely competitive, right? And that's the kind of critical thing. And in order to qualify for them, you essentially need a perfect score on your application, plus the ability to win tiebreakers, right? So they are very competitive. We want to make sure that we're identifying those ways to become competitive and compete for those awards moving forward.
And I would just add, I think you're right, Ken. We're seeing less and less tax credit projects happening in Frederick County, and it's a big problem. Some of it has to do with the competitive nature of those projects. Some of it has to do, are there projects that are ready to go in Frederick County? I do think there are things that we can do better. The Frederick County and the city have done a lot to try to incentivize affordable housing development here, but that is part of what we need to look at. Are there ways that we can do that even more? It is an opportunity-driven endeavor. But I think it's certainly something we need to be looking at more closely.
Thanks for your question.
Any other questions or comments? Thanks everyone for coming out tonight. We really appreciate your participation, and we hope you stay engaged in this project. And feel free to email me with any further questions or comments.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.